Blood components, additives, preparation, storage, outdates, and utilization. We'll talk about what's going on. So we start with the whole blood. You get a whole, very seldom is it actually used. It's actually, whole blood is getting back in favor. I've been to a couple different sessions lately where we've talked about blood, whole blood being used again for especially trauma. It's great for trauma patients because when we're dealing with a massive trauma, we're sitting bloods, we're sitting all these different units and trying to stack it where it's all in the whole blood. So we're looking at doing that again. Kind of new, some hospitals are doing it more. But we start out with the whole blood and we separate it usually though into at least 3 components. You get a unit of packed cells, you get a unit of platelets, and you get a unit of fresh frozen plasma out of it. So the automated, we talked about that. Whole blood donation, what happens with that, it takes what it wants and it gives back the rest. So if they're collecting platelets, they're going to give you back your red cells and your plasma. If it's collecting plasma, like the plasma center, it's going to give you your platelets and your red cells back. So it depends on what you're getting. So when you're dealing with a regular whole donation, you start with these interconnected bags. 4 bags is usually what we've got. This is only the 3, the 4th one's down below. Interconnected by tubing. It's a closed system, and what that means, there are no holes going into it with the exception of the needle. It's the only hole going into this closed system. Helps keep things clean, helps keep bacteria out, helps keep infections out. So what they're going to do is they're going to collect 500 cc's of donor blood into 70 mils of CPD mixture into the first bag of the 4-bag system. CPD, citrate, phosphate, and dextrose. When they first started the blood banks way back during World War I, or the British blood depots, they collected it and they had to give it. And they started and they realized they could save it longer and better by adding different things to it. The citrate is our anticoagulant. The phosphate is a buffer and helps with ATP production. And then the dextrose is nutrients. These red cells are still alive. They're still doing the Krebs cycle. They're still metabolizing. So it's really important to make sure that we're still feeding them when they're in the bags. So first step in the process, we're going to soft spin the blood, the whole blood, and a soft spin is just that, a softer spin. We're not going to hard centrifuge it, we're just going to soft spin it. And that's going to separate everything into 2 layers, red cells and then platelet-rich plasma. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to remove the platelet-rich plasma to a second bag. I'll show a video here in a little bit. What we do is we put the bag in this machine and we squeeze it up. And so the plasma gets squeezed up through this line into the next bag. At this point, the packed red cells, 200 to 250 mils. Remember we started out with about 500 mils? Hematocrit at this point, you're looking at about an 80% hematocrit, and its outdate is 21 days. This is really good for neonatal transfusions because we need for neonates, we need the high packed cell, the high hematocrit. So it works really, really well. And we have to be using fresh blood anyway, so that 21 outdate is okay. The third step, after we remove the platelet-rich plasma, we're going to add just 100 cc's of a new additive to the CPD cells. What the new additive is called Adsol. Additive solution, Adsol. It includes adenine for increased ATP production. We want to keep these cells alive. Little saline, and then dextrose for more nutrients. And sometimes this will contain mannitol for osmotic stability of the red cells to help the red cells stay osmotically stable. So we add the Adsol into the red cells, and now we've increased that volume to about 300 to 350 cc's, hematocrit about 50%. So we went from an 80% to a 50% by adding this Adsol. But we've also doubled the outdate from 21 days to 42 days. In normal times, this is a good thing. Honestly, right now, the Red Cross has 2 to 3 days of blood on a shelf at any given time. We're running that lean right now. There's not a bunch in storage. So, but the good news is, especially for those rare donors that they draw, it can sit on the shelf for 42 days. Now, if it gets close to the outdate, they're going to send that to a hospital to get used. They're not going to let it go bad. But they can hang on to it a little bit longer to make sure if somebody comes in that needs that match, they're going to get it. So after the added solution, the red bag gets separated off. The red cell bag gets separated. What they do, now at this time there have been no cuts, right? What they actually do is they use, I call it a curling iron. It's this little like heated clipper thing. And what it does is it's going gonna seal the bag, and then you cut it in the middle. So you put these two little crimps in to the closed system, and then you cut it in the middle. So again, you've never opened this system because you closed it off with these little like heat clamp things. Does that make sense? Like these, okay. It's kind of like I said, like a curling iron. It's gonna melt the bag, melt the tubing together. So now the fourth step is gonna be a hard centrifuge to the platelet-rich plasma. So we're gonna spin it a little bit harder, and what that's gonna do is pull those platelets to the bottom, and it's gonna leave cell-free plasma on the top. So then it gets put in another one of those machines, and it gets squeezed up, so that what happens is all of the platelet, it's gonna go this way, sorry, I forgot which way it's going, all of the cell-free plasma is going to be squeezed out where this is the platelets down behind. It's going to leave the platelets and about 50 cc's of plasma, small amount of plasma. That is why, though, when we give like an O platelet to somebody, we give them a little bit of anti-A and a little bit of anti-B. That's why we get that 1+ reaction sometimes if we've given O platelets, why we sometimes see that. So that leaves us with 3 units, and every time you break off a bag, they use that little heat crimper, pinch it off before they cut it. So the system has been closed, it's never been opened, except for the needle. The only place where it's been open, and that needle is fully sterilized and protected until it's opened up. So if there's bacteria in the system, it's because the site didn't get cleaned off well enough.
Your presentation is closed. Oops. Was that the last slide?
Nope. We'll see if it's still recording. Yeah.
Does that say outdated of 5 days?
Yes. Platelets outdate of 5 days. So red cells with the Adsol, it's 42 days, and it gets stored at 1 to 6 degrees, which is refrigerator. Plasma is 1 year, stored at -18, heavy freezer. Platelets, 5 days, stored 22 to 24. That's room temperature. They have to sit stored on a rotator at room temperature. Now, you can't just leave them in the room. They actually have to go into a refrigerator, cooler, incubator that maintains that 20 to 24. Because just out in the room like this room might fluctuate to 27, it might drop to 20, you know. So it's actually a room temperature box of some sort. Must stay in motion, it's only good for 5 days. Super short out date. Platelets do not last long, separated out. Red cells. We use red cells for oxygen carrying capacity. Okay, we do not use them for volume. We do not use them for fluid or whatever. It's for oxygen carrying capacity. For bleeding patients with greater than or 25% blood loss, or for anemic patients with hematocrits less than 26. Now, depending on where you are, those numbers might change. Anemic patients, if they are not able on their own to bring it back up. So if they have like a chronic anemia, something going on where they cannot bring their hematocrits back up themselves, that's when we're going to start seeing blood usage, red cell usage. If you're slightly anemic, and they're going to try iron first. They're going to try all sorts of things first to try to help bring that up on your own. Stored refrigerator, 1 to 6. With the Adsol, it's good for 42 days. With just the CPT, it's only good for 21 days. Once the bag has been opened, you have 24 hours. A whole bag of blood is a lot. If you're doing peds, it's multiple ped packs, depending on the size of the infant or neonate. So sometimes they'll open a unit of blood to separate them out into ped packs, but once it's open, it's only good for 24 hours. Yeah.
Do they ever donate blood into PD packs?
No.
Okay.
It'd be a lot of work because they'd have to like keep flipping, because some of the and the ped packs have to be hematocrit adjusted depending on, are you dealing with a prenatal 28-week gestation or a NICU preemie, or are you dealing with a 6-month-old? I mean, so you think about their needs are going to be a lot different. So what they do in those facilities then is they're going to separate them out, adjust the hematocrits to where they need to be. I do not go into that with you guys. That's a very specialized skill. I'm not going to make you learn that formula. It's not worth it. If you end up at a facility that has neonates, you'll learn it. But a lot of hospitals ship their neonates into one of the big hospitals, right? I mean, a small town hospital isn't gonna wanna deal with, you know, a 30-week, 2-week gestation baby that needs help.
I'm sorry, when we talk about outdates, is that when it's in the refrigerator?
The outdate starts the day it was drawn.
Okay.
The day it was drawn and processed. Usually they get drawn and processed within 12 hours. If the bag is, like I said, that 24 hours, if you wash it, so again, you open the bag for wash cells. If you're doing, for example, an IgE deficient patient, you don't want to give them any plasma, so you want to wash it. That's only good for 24 hours. Pretty much, once that bag is open to do anything with it, 24 hours.
And once you wash them, is that room temperature until you're using it, or for storage?
I think once it's washed, it gets put back into the fridge.
Okay.
We don't want to keep things at room temperature because if we keep them at room temperature, things grow faster. Now, frozen, they're good for 10 years. Bombay, we have frozen blood at the Red Cross. Special rare donors, we have frozen. The problem with frozen, they're going to get slightly different processing, and they don't last. I mean, we're freezing them, there'll still be some viable cells, but you start losing a lot of viability of the cells in the freezer. So we do have them, they're just not as good. We'd much rather have fresh in-date blood than frozen. So changes in stored cells. Glucose goes down. Makes sense, right? The cells are utilizing the glucose. pH goes down, becomes more acidic. Makes sense with the ATP, the Krebs cycle, everything happening. Decreased 2,3-DPG levels. Decreased ATP, they're using the ATP. Decreased sodium, increased potassium. Slight increase in hemolysis, because over time those cells start dying off. Remember, some of those cells, the day you draw them, are 120 days old. So they're going to start dying off, so there's going to be some amount of hemolysis while storing those cells. The glycolytic pathway, I'm not making you memorize this. So you probably have memorized it at some point in the past. Pretty much what I want you to understand is glucose is going to be consumed during glycolysis. These cells are still running through this cycle. They're going to utilize glucose. They're going to produce acid. That's the final step of the glycolysis. 2,3-DPG levels are going to drop due to the acid production. O2 transport gets affected. Adenine is needed for ATP production. And decreased ATP production is going to shorten the red cell lifespan. So it kind of all goes back to what's happening in that Krebs cycle. ATP levels are the main factor in determining red cell effectiveness and outdate. Within 24 hours of transfusion, 2,3-DPG gets completely restored. So over time, it's going to go down in storage, but as soon as we transfuse that, the body's going to help those cells, and it's going to become completely restored. Most people, fresh versus aged blood, most people do just fine with aged blood. Cases that do require fresh blood, intrauterine transfusions, neonates, pediatrics, so the littles, right? If it's a little, put them in that list. And sickle cell patients. Sickle cell patients do much better with fresh blood than with stored or aged blood. Random donor platelets. This is going to be used to stop or prevent small vessel bleeding. It's got a 5-day outdate. Stored in constant motion at room temp. The room temp is going to help prevent clumping of the platelets and going to help maintain air exchange within the platelets to keep them functioning well. We give them in pools of 4 to 6. Once we pool them, it outdates in 4 hours. So what that means is each of these is only about 50 cc's, right? So think about how much 50 cc's is. That's not a lot. So what we do is we make, a lot of times we call it a 6-pack. And what we do is we have these special spiky things. We're going to spike it and we're going to pool. So we're literally going to squeeze the platelets out of 6 different bags to put them in one bag for a pooled platelet. So 6 different donors become one pooled platelet. Now there's also single donor platelets where you can go to the Red Cross, and that's probably what Cohen was talking about, where you go and they're going to take your platelets, give you everything else back, and that's the equivalent of 6 individual platelets. So it's one donor. The nice thing with that, we're exposing that patient to one donor's antigens and not 6. But then there's also a theory out there, I don't know where this stands right now, There are so few in each of the 6, you don't get a response. Whereas the 1, you're likely to get a response because you're getting more of exactly the same. It's kind of an interesting, there's a lot of weird stuff happening in blood bank. You wouldn't realize it unless you're out there right now. There's a lot of research going on.
The platelet bag, does that also have the white blood cells? So are those in the plasma bag after you do the heart spin?
Most of them are going to be in the red cells
Oh,
because they're bigger.
The notes say the centrifugation is hard enough this time to pull the platelets and white cells into a layer at the bottom of the bag, leaving an essentially cellular-free plasma component on top, and that's after the red cells have been separated. Is that just if there's any left, maybe?
You know, I don't know.
Okay.
Now-
I think the
now-
white cells are in the platelets because that's why they're always going through the leukofilter.
Yeah,
I thought
but
that's
we
what we
put
figured.
cells through the leukofilter too, though. I'm gonna look into that. Let me look into that more. Because if we're filtering out, platelets are decent size too, and I would be afraid maybe not, so bigger. I don't know, I'm gonna have to look into that. Let me look into that and get back to you. Random platelet donors platelet themselves because they contain very few ABO antigens, and the plasma contains ABO antibodies. The plasma should be ABO compatible with patients' red cells, but we know it's not always, and it's not as big a deal because some ABO incompatible platelets, you're self-limiting. You're giving some antibody, but you're only giving a self-limiting amount. When it's gone, and it's not a lot. Something they can do with this volume reduced to minimize ABO incompatible plasma, but we don't even see that very often. Now, RH becomes a little more important because platelets, they contain no RH antibodies, but there's oftentimes a few red cell contaminants in those platelets. So because of that, they may be enough to sensitize an RH negative patient. Remember, an RH negative patient doesn't need a lot of D to become sensitized to it, so some of them could be sensitized. So we want to make sure to give RH negative platelets to RH negative females of childbearing age or younger. So here's just kind of an example. Negligible red cells. This is only 0.05 mils of red cells per bag. It's only a small amount, only 0.1, 0.5. So they get pretty pink pretty quick. Is kind of what this is showing you. It doesn't take many red cells to turn it pink, but this might have a few still in it. And we want to be really, really careful. Now, apheresis platelets. That's what I was talking about from one person, also known as single donor platelets, equivalent to 4 to 6 random donors. 5-day outdate, room temperature storage in motion, just like the single donor platelets. The nice thing is, though, it does minimize risk of multiple donors, but like I said before, the multiple donors had such a small amount of each, it may not have been enough to sensitize, so they're kind of looking at that right now. Implemented bacterial in transfusions, coagulate staph, 52%. Where's coagulate staph found? Skin. Yep. So you don't clean the skin well enough. That's where most of our infections come from. The next one, Staph aureus, Streptococcus species, and then a lot of smaller ones down here. But those 3 are going to be our biggest ones. This was in a collection from March 1st, 2004 to December 31st, 2014. So it was a 10-year, greater than 8 million distributed apheresis of platelets. These are the infections that they found. Platelets are super susceptible to bacterial growth because we store them at room temperature. Refrigeration slows down bacterial growth, right? That's why we store urines in the fridge. That's why we, put things in the fridge for preservative because it prevents bacterial growth. Most of the time, staph and bacillus are going to be skin contaminants. Like that video we just watched, they didn't let it clean. They didn't let it dry. So we know it's not clean. Up to 1,000 cases per year of clinical sepsis from platelets. That's a lot. I mean, in the big picture, it doesn't seem like a lot, but 1,000 cases a year is a lot. Because of this, we have seen fatalities with gram negatives. So because of all this, blood banks have to have methods to limit and detect bacterial contamination of platelets. So some different strategies to do that: gram staining culture on all apheresis single donor platelets at the donor center. The problem with that it takes 2 to 3 days to grow. They're only good for 5. So it becomes problematic. Dipstick for pH and glucose. A lot of transfusions places will pool platelets and do a quick dipstick just to see what it's at before it sends it out. PCR testing is a lot more sensitive than dipstick. It's actually becoming more and more in common usage now. We're seeing it quite a bit more, and it's faster. Swirling, believe it or not, an actually accepted way of doing this is you swirl the bag and you're looking for platelets to swirl. When they line up and swirl real nice, they're good, versus when they kind of like clump up and get all funky looking. If they don't swirl nicely, they're not good. That's only used as a last resort. A lot of people still on its way out, even if it passes everything, we do a quick swirl just to make sure they look good. Pathogen reduced platelets. There are different systems out there kind of being developed, being worked on. Intercept system, they use this imotasalin. I don't know what exactly that is. It's a preservative though. It irreversibly blocks the replication of DNA and RNA, preventing the proliferation of susceptible pathogens. So they actually put it into the platelets, something else that's out there. Septic transfusion reactions, here you can kind of see this just looks kind of funky. Onset within, usually when we see these, we're going to see them within 4 hours of transfusion. If we see any of the following signs, fever, rigors, blood pressure increase, tachycardia, what we do is we're going to take a culture of the residual product, culture, anything we can look for, you know, and then we see, oops, we just infected them with something. Platelets are rough, but there's no fake platelets out there. Fresh frozen plasma contains all of the clotting factors if frozen within 8 hours of collection. So that's always our goal, get it to the collection site or get it from the collection site to the center and get it all spun off, separated off and into the freezer. If it's not frozen within 8 hours, it can still be frozen, but it can't be called fresh frozen plasma. Now it gets called plasma frozen within 24 hours, and now it's deficient of some of the clotting factors. So now you guys are in coag, some of this might make a little sense when you're thinking of that clotting cascade and all the different things that we're looking for. We use plasma to correct prolonged clotting times if we're dealing with people with issues. Store it at -18 for 1 year. We thaw it at 30 to 37. They actually thaw these in special water baths or special baths where they get thawed at a steady temperature. You can't just put them on the counter and wait to thaw. You know, you don't want to just run them under hot water in the sink. Definitely don't want to microwave it. Okay. You think you wouldn't have to say that. Store it at 1 to 6 after thawing. So once it's thawed, we store it in the fridge until we use it. Once it's thawed, outdate is 24 hours. If it is not used within that 24 hours, now we can relabel it as thawed plasma. And now it's good for 5 days, but it's now deficient in 5 and 8. Clotting factors 5 and 8. Cryoprecipitate. Cryoprecipitate is pretty cool. It contains factor 8, fibrinogen, von Willebrand's factor, and factor 13. It's really good at treating disseminated vascular coagulation. Also hemophilia A, because of the clotting factor 8. Now you can see that little bit? That's all it is. It's that little bit, but it's super, super powerful. So what they do with that is they take fresh frozen plasma, they thaw it in the refrigerator. So this is intentional. They intentionally put it in the fridge to thaw. When it does that, precipitates, the cryoprecipitate actually precipitates out. And then what they'll do is they will draw off the cryo into a separate bag, refreeze it, store it at -18 for 1 year. The fresh frozen plasma then can be relabeled as plasma cryosupernatate removed and refrozen. And then the cryoprecipitate, when you're ready to transfuse it, you're gonna thaw it also in that 30 to 37 bath. Store it 20 to 24, so room temperature once it's thawed. Small volume, only 10 to 20 cc's, and it's given in pools of 10. Once it's thawed, it outdates in 6 hours. Once it's pooled, it's 4. Yeah.
What instances would we give that, like severely lacking clotting factors? Or?
Yeah, like it gets used for, I know it's been used in the past for women post-pregnancy. Oh, sorry. I don't know what I said, that's why I started looking around. I'm like, what am I hearing?
Public service.
Oh, is it an announcement? It's not an Amber Alert. All of our phones would be going off as Amber Alert, right? That's always scary when that happens, the whole room goes off. Anyway, post-pregnancy, if women are bleeding out, disseminated vascular coagulation is good for that, because it's like a huge hit really fast of heavy coagulation factors. And so it's like a bolus. Even though it's a small amount, there's a lot of power in that small amount. Most places don't keep it on hand. Smaller hospitals, I don't think, tend to keep it on hand. The bigger hospitals will. Granulocyte concentrates. I love this. They're kind of out of favor. They come and go over time. We actually, we do an apheresis of people, and they get stored at room temperature only for 24 hours. But when you're dealing with an infection that is a highly resistant microbial infection, we can give you white cells to fight it, healthy white cells to fight it. Must give several days in a row. It's super expensive, so it's not super approved very often. And now we are getting some of these drugs for granulocyte colony assimilating factors. There's drugs out there to help this. But how cool is that? You know, giving white cells. It's just like this, you know, I think it's really cool. We don't see it very often, but they are something that do exist. So, whole blood, it gets red cells, platelet-rich plasma, which gets plasma and platelets. Plasma can become frozen plasma, fresh frozen plasma, fractionation. So there's lots of things that can be broken down. Minimum, every unit of blood gets